I will say hello there, everyone. My name is Jack Packard.
I'm Darren Mooney.
And I'm Stacy Grouden.
Yes, Stacy, and thank you for joining us once again for the Escapist Movie Podcast. This week we are going to talk brand new Predator news. We are going to talk Sarah Paulson's parental stylings in Run. Sarah Paulson? That's her name?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. I enjoy her as an actress. I have a terrible memory. And then we are going to talk about Hillbilly Elegy, which I'm sure we have so much to say about. Good old Ron Howard swinging for the fences again, I think. But those are the topics. This is the Escapist Movie Podcast. We're going to get right into it with Predator news. There's a new Predator film in the works. It is being directed by Dan Trachtenberg, if I'm pronouncing Trachtenberg, maybe.
Trachtenberg?
Is that how?
It's an or.
Trachtenberg.
Yeah. It's
Dan
being,
to his friends.
It's being directed by Dan. Many people will know Dan from 10 Cloverfield Lane, probably the biggest movie he's done. Hold on, you know what? I didn't.
He's done some TV directing as well. He's actually done
okay.
quite a bit of TV directing. Did an episode of The Boys, for example, as well. And he did an episode, I think, of Black Mirror, if I remember correctly. He did the one with
Yes.
Wyatt Russell in it.
You
was a game test
are
or something.
correct.
Or playtest, sorry. Playtest, apologies.
But for me, what I found out digging through Dan's IMDb is I have been subscribed to Dan's YouTube channel for 9 years after he directed the superb fan fiction Portal No Escape. If you go to YouTube, you can look up Portal No Escape. It's a tiny little 4-minute fan fiction of Shell from Portal. And if you are a person like me who loves video games and therefore loves Portal, 9 years ago, that short was a huge deal. To me, at least, I guess. So
Yeah.
I'm just excited. He's making it. He's making big stuff now.
He is, and it's probably actually a good move if we're being entirely honest. I mean, the Predator franchise is one of those franchises that I am not sure needs to be a franchise. In that, like, I genuinely, I adore the first movie. The first Predator is one of the great 80s action movies, and we can maybe talk about that in a moment. I know Stacy watched it recently, and Stacy has, I think, some really good takes on that. But I think that, like, the issue with Predator is that it's a very simple concept, which is you drop a bunch of people into a situation and they're hunted by a predator. Except this time, instead of being, I don't know, like rich dudes in, in whatever the most dangerous game, it's just an alien with like fangs, and also it can cloak and it has lasers, and those are cool. So let's just go with that. And like, again, it's the concept that seems like it should be fairly straightforward. And in fact, actually, I would argue the big problem with Predator is that it arrived just a little bit too late, in that I could absolutely see Predator working as kind of like an 80s horror movie style series. Something like, say, the Friday the 13th series, or something like Nightmare on Elm Street, where what you do is you just rotate through the concept every movie. So it's like Predator is the one in the jungle, and Predator 2 is, Predator 2 is a whole bunch of problems which we're not going to talk about. Let's say Predator 3 is like they're pirates in the 18th century or something. Predator 3 is they're on a space station. That's sort of like, just change the concept up, change the cast of characters, have a Predator arrive and hunt them. I would argue one of the big issues with Predator, or the Predator as a concept, is that it is not as robust as the obvious point of comparison here, which is the alien from Alien, or the xenomorph from Alien, because the alien from Alien represents all sorts of big ideas and concepts. It is about procreation. It is about assault. It is about violation. It is about nihilism. It is about monstrosity. It's about the idea the universe is a fundamentally uncaring and hostile place to human existence. These are big concepts that you can theoretically wrap good movies around. The question of whether or not they have been able to do that is a matter of debate, and we're probably not going to get into that. But my issue is, like, when you look at the Predator does not have that sense of that same, like, root core idea. It's like, what does the Predator represent, Jack? Does it represent... It's an alien that hunts people in, like, movies where aliens hunt people. That's what it represents.
It represented a subversion of expectations in an Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie, which is like, oh, you expect Arnold and his gang of brutes to be the fiercest warriors, but they're not, which is part of what makes Predator so brilliant, in my opinion. Right. I think, like, just to mirror what you've said and spin it a little bit, the problem with both Predator and the Aliens franchises is they spend so much time kind of reaching up their own ass into lore that never existed in the first place, and that, frankly, we don't care about. I don't care about the Predator homeworld or the way their society is structured. I want to see cool action things. Yeah. I don't care about, like, where the aliens came from or why they existed. They, like you said, they're more of a representation of an idea, and as they try to, like, milk this, oh man, I'm a hand talker, and so I apologize for the milking
gesture.
But as they try to milk more juice out of these franchises, they keep scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Well, I think it's in large part because, like, the modern franchise is built around the idea of lore. Like, we no longer have the equivalent of those kind of, like, 80s or 70s disposable sequels. Like, remember the Planet of the Apes sequels from the 70s, where it was just, put another bunch of people in ape masks and have them do ape stuff, and it's whatever it is, we'll put it in cinemas, we'll release it next year, it'll be fantastic. Yep. Everything now has to be world-changing, it has to be grand, it has to scale upwards, it has to be bigger, it has to market this tie-in, it has to connect to this whole idea of a universe and a shared lore, and I think that, like, that's my big problem with the Predator as a franchise, is that I don't think the Predator is a concept that is designed for that sort of scaling upwards. And I would argue, like, the Predator, the recent Shane Black movie, which is, I would argue, the worst movie Shane Black has ever made, in large part for the reasons that Jack alluded to there, which is it builds a mythology around that it doesn't really need, or it doesn't really justify having, where there are now bigger predators who hunt smaller predators, because that's how this works, apparently. Because apparently, like, again, it's like the origin of the alien. You need to know the background, you need to know where the predator came from, and apparently the answer is a place where there are even bigger predators who hunt them. So I don't know. Next up, we're going to scale up, and it like, that's something that I don't think works with the concept, which is a shame, because that's what I said when I said that, you know, maybe it would have worked if it had been released like 10 years earlier and it become a franchise where all you do is you take the same plot and you swap out the setting. Maybe the Predator would work in that way. I don't think it works in a sense of, well, look, now here's Boyd Holbrook and he's gonna be hunting predators because he's the most badass franchise back-building character actor we could afford.
No, but I do love your pitch of, like, the Predator versus pirates. Like, why don't we have that? That would be great.
Yeah, like Predator in the Hood, like Leprechaun in the Hood.
Oh, well, that was I would argue that was two.
That's two, right? Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it feels really bad that the first place they went after the first movie was, like, the most racist place, but we won't get into that too much.
And Darren, Stacy, Darren just said that you just watched Predator recently.
I mean, I'd seen it before, but I rewatched it relatively recently, just to kind of refamiliarize myself with Predator. I do still think the monster design is really, really good of the Predator, in terms of it being this very fearsome, very awful, like, genuinely threatening figure.
Yeah.
You know, it's tiny little beady eyes, it's mandibles, like, you get the great reveal. Yeah, you get this great reveal in the first movie where he takes his mask off and he's frightening. Like, the Predator is this horrifying looking monster. And I think the design is really, really good. Yeah, in terms of ascribing a greater kind of ideology or meaning to him, I agree with Darren and yourself that it's just really not there in the same way as it would be in something like the Alien franchise. However, when I was watching it most recently, I did notice the pecking order that the Predator's victims seem to kind of, in which they seem to fall. And I found it kind of interesting from my own perspective, watching it in 2020 and also watching it as a woman, in that the people I hated the most in the movie were picked off first. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. So you have Shane Black's character, who might be called Hawkins, the guy with the glasses.
Yeah.
Who's telling these really gross jokes about his girlfriend. he gets picked off really quickly. He dies very early on. He tells the joke to the Sonny Langdon character, whose name I can't remember, the tracker guy, who laughs. At one point, they're in the jungle, he tells him one of these jokes, and he laughs. And it's that laugh that the Predator kind of very iconically kind of absorbs and parrots back as this threatening, horrible sound. You know, the Predator is taking the sound of complicity with sexist jokes and he's weaponizing it. As a woman, that really spoke to me. It's like when you see a man laughing at a disrespectful joke about a woman, it can feel weaponized. So it's like the Predator understands this. The Predator understands this, and that speaks to me.
All right.
And you also have the Jesse Ventura character, who the first time you see him is using a homophobic slur. And in this kind of very demeaning, horrible way. He also dies very early on. And I'm like, the Predator somehow is sensing like this macho insecurity that is being externalized by the guys in their speech patterns, in their jokes.
I love the idea of the Predator as like this proto-feminist.
Ally. He sees the Predator as an ally.
Yeah, Predator as secret ally.
Yes.
And that laugh becomes so menacing and so jarring towards the climax of the movie, especially when he does like one of these all-time great final dick moves and sets off the bomb as he realizes he's about to die. He's like, well, if I'm going out, I'm taking everybody who's left here with me. Which is a move I have to respect. So watching Predator again, I felt like the title was maybe unjustified. Yes, he's very violent in the way he's picking people off, but maybe he recognizes that there's some real problems there.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, if we could learn how to communicate with him, get him involved in some non-violent conflict resolution.
But who was the real Predator?
Who was the real Predator?
Was it the alien or was it the American military industrial complex trying to resolve something under the radar? Which was probably like one of like the things that they were like, oh yeah, that'll be like in there, but not a big thing. But then when the Predator became popular, it's like, oh, the Predator is the alien because that's the name of the movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
My reading on Predators, like, obviously much less awesome than Stacy's, and it's much more conventional. I know, like, that Stacy's actually brilliant. I'm kind of wondering now, should I bring up, like, the vagina dentata kind of stuff that's going on with the Predator when it takes off its mask? The mandibles and the way in which the mouth is constructed, which is its own kettle of fish, maybe, to get into. But, no, again, the thing that I always found interesting about the Predator is that it is a movie that is steeped in its time and place. Very much so in terms of 80s America, in that I think it's Susan Jeffords' Hard Bodies, which is a fantastic read for anybody who loves 80s action cinema. But she made the argument that coming out of, say, Vietnam, and in the aftermath of things like, say, the feminist movement in the 70s and 60s and 70s, you had this idea of American masculinity that was very challenged, that was challenged by a changing world and by the idea that, you know, maybe US military might didn't mean the same thing that it did immediately after the Second World War. So what you saw coming out of that, according to Jeffords, was this idea kind of like the hard body. Sylvester Stallone in the late 70s, Schwarzenegger, playing all American characters. Like, that's the most interesting thing about Schwarzenegger, is that, like, as long as he's big, muscled, and heroic, we have no problem accepting the idea that he is an idealized American man. Just don't ask any questions about the accent. And what I think is and like what's interesting about the Predator is that it belongs. Sorry, Predator. I should call it Predator, not the Predator. The Predator is the Predator movie that actually has a Predator in it. You can Google that and figure out what's going on there. We're not going to talk about it, I suspect. Predator is very much, it belongs to that kind of subgenre of late 70s and early 80s movies that are largely about replaying Vietnam, but in a weird way where the Americans get to imagine themselves as the Viet Cong. And included in that example is, like, say, the Star Wars movies, where the all-heroic, like, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, kind of, like, Luke Skywalker joins the rebels to fight this Imperial force that, like, burnt his family alive with napalm. And in case you don't get that, we come back in, like, Return of the Jedi, where the Empire is defeated by this bunch of forest-dwelling, what we would call primitives, kind of like non-advanced, non-technologically or tactically advanced society. What does that represent, I wonder? You could arguably say that even extends to, say, the first Rambo movie, which is about a Vietnam veteran who comes home to America and ends up waging guerrilla warfare against, like, a tactically superior, numerically superior, and more organized force hunting him through the forest, in case you don't get what's going on here.
There is no, like, I think a lot of people forget the first Rambo movie. There is no subtext there. Like, literally, Stallone has a soliloquy at the end explaining it all.
Yeah, just in case you don't get the point. But I mean, and it becomes like cycled back into the later Rambo movies, where he just goes and like wages guerrilla warfare in Vietnam, in case you don't get
Gets a little muddled, absolutely.
Yeah, in case you don't get the idea that we are recycling the idea or trauma into these stories. So in Predator, you have this idea of an all-American tactical unit being sent into Central America, coming up against a vastly technologically and tactically superior foe that, you know, doesn't outnumber them, but outguns them sufficiently enough. And basically, the way in which Schwarzenegger wins is by adopting guerrilla tactics. He strips off his uniform. He covers himself in mud. He crawls through incredibly tight spaces. He fashions weapons from kind of wooden spears. And you have this kind of weird thing that happens a lot in American movies at the time. And think of like Red Dawn, for example, which is another example where America is literally occupied by a major foreign power so that teenagers can play at being guerrilla warfare. But basically where you have this idea of adopting tactics that were associated with the Viet Cong in Vietnam and playing them out using American characters and American iconography.
Well, and this definitely like culminated even in the 90s in, you know, like the biggest guerrilla warfare movie ever, Home Alone.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say Die Hard, but you're entirely right. You are entirely right. It's like Home Alone is about the invasion of your territory by a tactically and numerically superior foe and having to set up booby traps to stop them. But yeah, like so, and I think like that's the thing that you miss when you try and turn Predator into a franchise is that the original movie is very much anchored in that sensibility in the 1980s. It's very much a movie of its time and place. And I feel like none of the sequels have managed to be or to update that in a way that works. I think Predator 2 is a very 1990 movie, but not in a way that should make anybody feel particularly comfortable in its portrayal of, and I quote from the production notes here, the urban jungle, in case you don't get what we're alluding to here. But yeah, like, I mean, I feel like, that's the thing that I think of when I think of the Predator franchise, is the original movie was so rooted in where it was, what it was doing, and what America was like at the time. And none of the sequels have managed to keep up with that. None of the sequels have managed to do something that manages to resonate in that way.
Agreed. Give me one moment. Okay, so bringing all that Predator talk into the news of a new Predator film, here's a bit of positivity. Dan Trachtenberg, I really apologize if I am butchering your name, has done 2 bits of adaptation. I'm going to use really loose quotation marks in that, in his lovely Portal short and in 10 Cloverfield Lane, to exist in a franchise world but tell a different story, or at least a competent story. And so, like, as a director, he might be able to do what you say and just have another Predator movie that takes place not connected to the muddle.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. Oh, sorry, Stacey.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it's interesting to note that Trachtenberg seems to have been slightly annoyed that his Predator movie has been revealed to be a Predator movie. Maybe not annoyed, it's hard to read tone from a tweet, but the insinuation seems to be that he had been working on this for a little while, that it wasn't out there as a Predator movie, and the story has broken that that's what he's doing. The film that had been announced, I think, had been titled Skulls, and the description was about a Comanche woman who breaks with gender norms to become a warrior, which is very interesting. It does seem to kind of link into what he's done previously with this Portal short and with even 10 Cloverfield Lane, and that it's a woman who maybe in captivity or bound by something like gender norms who has to kind of figure out new rules for herself, a new way to exist, and to incorporate the Predator into that. I don't know if that's what she has to train up to be a warrior to fight against, or, you know, if he has some other tricks up his sleeve. But it seems like there is scope within that synopsis to, yeah, kind of reimagine the Predator, or reimagine who his foe might be, or indeed his ally. You know, it's a very brief synopsis that's out there, and until this week we didn't know it was a Predator movie. So time will tell, you know.
Yeah, and we got a little bit of that just going into the extensive, unfortunately, Predator catalog in Predator versus Alien, or sorry, Alien versus Predator, where the Predator teams up with the human woman to fight the alien, which, I mean, it's a terrible, terrible movie.
Yeah.
And yet somehow possibly the third best movie starring a Predator, which is depressing.
Yeah, and so it's like we have like a ton of Predator in the world already. Maybe this, unfortunately, to me is very similar to a lot of talk we do when we're talking about like The Mandalorian or any sort of intellectual property that takes another stab at it, which is, you can have a good story in your own world, but as soon as you start getting into the soup of the other parts of the intellectual property is when the trouble starts. And so perhaps because he wanted to keep it secret that it was a Predator movie, that gives me a little bit of hope.
Yeah, I think there's also the possibility that because the Predator was supposed to be, as in like the Predator, the Shane Black movie, was supposed to be a big franchise launching kind of like, you know, starter, multimedia starter, that maybe we've reached the point where the studio's like, hey, go take this intellectual property that we can't seem to make work. Go do what you want to do with it and come back, and whatever it is, we'll work with, and it'll be grand. And maybe it'll be a situation where, like, this will be great. And in the second one, the studio will be like, by the way, we have notes. Could you put an alien skull up here? Could you set up a crossover over here? Where they meant launching a TV show that we could maybe spin this character off. You could slot them in nicely. But, like, my ideal fantasy at the moment is the idea that, yeah, the fact that it was developed under its own title separately, as Stacy pointed out, and the fact that Trachtenberg has a history of doing this sort of thing, as Jack pointed out, which is 10 Cloverfield Lane, I think, was not even sold originally as a Cloverfield sequel. It was the title was stuck on at the last minute, I believe, for marketing purposes. Similar to the Cloverfield Paradox, which is a much worse film. But the idea, like, it's a very different take on a similar idea, and that kind of gives me a little bit of hope that maybe Trachtenberg not only wants to do this, but he might actually be able to do this. That he might be able to make a Predator movie that doesn't carry the weight of being a possible franchise or brand starter for the Predator brand, because the Predator brand is like cool action movies. I just want cool action movies. That's all I really want from it. So maybe.
It's very funny that Boyd Holbrook, when he was being interviewed for his Fugitive TV show, which again I feel like is an IP that nobody particularly cares about, straight up said people don't really care about the Predator. Like, I think he was asked if he was surprised that the Predator didn't really do as well as might be expected for a franchise relaunch, and he said, well, no. The first movie kind of captured lightning in a bottle. Every subsequent attempt has been to try and recapture that without any real understanding of what made it work. And that's maybe something Dan Trachtenberg has a better eye to than...
Absolutely.
The attempts we've seen previously.
Except for, of course, the only other lightning it caught was the Batman versus Predator comic mini-series, which, while is pretty bad, it's kind of fun in a very bad way.
I was a big fan of the video game, actually, I have to say, as far as these cash-ins go and tie-ins go. Big fan of the Alien vs. Predator thing. And I will, fine, feck it, I'll go to bat for Predators. It's not particularly brilliant. It's not an amazing film. I like Nimrod Antel's previous film, Vacancy, better. But I will say that, like, if you have to do a Predator sequel, I'd rather it be something like Predators, which is just odd. Like, Adrian Brody, casting the Oscar winner from The Pianist as your action hero, and having him do the Batman voice through all of it. Casting Topher Grace as, like, the most dangerous of the Predators. Like, these things are delightfully odd and weird, and the movie doesn't really, like, excel or take off, but I kind of admire that it went there. Like, again, like, something like Predators, but better, is kind of what I would want from a Predator sequel, where it's like, we're not going to just do or rehash the same, kind of thing. We're going to try and kind of just go wild and see whatever works and whatever the director seems to have latched onto as a concept. Sure, Lawrence Fishburne could be in it for 15 minutes and be completely insane, talking to himself, and then get quickly killed off, because why not? Like, that sort of stuff I'm on board with. I would like to see, like, I much preferred Predators to Predator 2 or The Predator, as far as, like, Predators, or the Alien versus Predator films as well, in terms of, like, so yeah.
No, and I think, like, you know, give us, you know, Warriors versus a Predator in a different setting, which, I mean, and of course we have just almost no information to go off of here, but based off of the snippets we have, maybe that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
That would be great. Pirates. I'm just putting that out there. Pirates. Ever since Darren said that, I would love that, like a nautical adventure with a group of rowdy pirates that run into the Predator on a deserted island. Love it. I'm there.
Predators
for it.
Pirates in an adventure with predators. But I do kind of like, I have a laundry list. Like, there was a while where I was just kind of thinking through this, and it's like, let's do it with samurai. Let's just drop it into like Akira. And I mean, Predators, like, the best scene in Predators is the kind of Akira Kurosawa standoff sequence where they do the Akira Kurosawa, you slash and then you fall down, but one of the guys doing it is a predator who's like 6 feet tall and an alien. And it's like, that sort of thing, you know? So, like,
do it, you cowards.
Samurai, pirates. I kind of think astronauts today might be fun. I don't know. Okay, fine.
I think go back to the kind of space station or off-world settings for it.
Yeah, like, astronauts are very cumbersome as we know them right now, you know?
Think of it as like Gravity, but with a predator.
Never mind, you've sold me. Where can I buy my ticket?
What about on a train? How about a Predator on a train? You know, there's real tension in a train-based thriller in that it's on this very set track. You can't easily get off it while it's in motion.
Go full Under Siege. I love it.
Unstoppable with a predator.
Unstoppable with Predator, yeah.
I love that basically what we're doing is taking existing movies and just dropping a predator into it and going,
that's all you have to do, and we would all love it. Why do you try to make this more complicated than it needs to be?
Yeah, Panic Room with a predator. Come on.
Ooh, Predator. Come on. Yeah, Predators breaking into your house.
Or sorry, Green Room with a predator actually is kind of what I was thinking of as well.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
All right. Wrapping up Predator talk. Love it. Love every minute of it. I hope it does well. I like action schlock, you know.
Yeah, and Trachtenberg's a good director, and, you know, I mean, it's always good to see a director having fun with a concept, and I think that, as we kind of discussed, Predator, the original Predator, tapped into something that was brilliant, and I'm not as cynical as Boyd Holbrook, so maybe. Few of us are as cynical as Boyd Holbrook.
Absolutely. Well, as we talk about schlock, that will kind of dance us into the next topic, which is a different kind of dramatic, suspenseful thriller schlock known as Run, available here in the States on Hulu as a Hulu original, starring the ever wonderful and talented Sarah Paulson. Also, who plays the daughter? Because she was great.
Kira Allen. She's fantastic.
Amazing cast. I think I'm going to start my compliment sandwich if I can here, which is the cast knocks it out of the park. It is a very tense and suspenseful movie. So I'm going to just start with compliments. We'll get into the other stuff later. This will be spoiler free for a little bit, and then I'll give a little spoiler tag later.
And it's only 90 minutes long as well. It literally runs. It hums. Like, it's that perfect kind of. I have a sweet spot for this sort of like Hitchcockian, and again, Hitchcockian's one of those adjectives that gets thrown around and creates an unrealistic expectation. Let's just call it schlocky. Delightfully kind of schlocky thriller. The idea of like a high concept, high intensity. We get in. We watch the action, we get out. There's no illusions of kind of grandeur. Like, Sarah Paulson is a fantastic actor. I would argue she's one of the better actors of her generation. But I would also observe that there's a reason why Ryan Murphy loves Sarah Paulson so much. And a large part of that is down to the fact that we are just waiting for her to do Whatever Happened to Baby Jane at some point in her career. And, like, I think that Run understands exactly what it is and what it's doing. And I think it works remarkably well in that register. Like Jack, I think there are some issues, but just generally speaking, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and Sarah Paulson as well. This is very on brand for her. She has started in recent years to build this brand as kind of a scream queen. But I don't want to say that she's typecast as such. While she has started working in this very particular register of like calm, polite white woman suddenly goes bananas. She is capable of playing to kind of both ends of the spectrum, I think, in a melodrama. She could be the hero or the villain. She could be the victim or the perpetrator of violence. And that's something she has been seen to do kind of in American Horror Story in particular, which is when I think she kind of broke out among kind of genre fans, where she had the opportunity to play a different character in each season because it's kind of an anthology show. So she gets to kind of show her full range as kind of, as I said, shrinking Violet, and then, you know, as Darren said, Baby Jane on the other end of it.
I will actually say, to single out her performances in like the Murphyverse, her American Crime Story, where she played the role of the lawyer. Damn it, I can't remember her name. Marcia Clark is one of the great, again, and I would argue that the People vs. O.J. Simpson American Crime Story has one of the best cast, giving some of the best performances of their career. And also David Schwimmer. It's fantastic. It's well worth your time if you get a chance. Sorry, David.
He did fine. He did fine.
Yeah, he was there.
He was there. He did fine.
He was certainly in it.
Right, and it's like, yeah, you know, and I know this is a point that Darren has done a great job of illustrating several times, but this is a movie that normally would be you know, your low to mid budget kind of theater fodder that you just go to, popcorn thriller feature that now goes to streaming services because that's where movies like this go. But you know, it was just a fun watch. The personal story I have is the particular subject matter this is about is very personally for me like one of my trigger fingers that really gets me amped up. I'm currently wearing an Apple Watch which tracks my heart rate. And I got an alert after watching this movie that while sitting, I had an elevated heart rate for an extended period of time because of Run. That is not a joke. It really, really got to me, especially for like how simple the story is. Again, no spoilers, but there is an extended sequence in which we are watching a character's index finger move closer to a thing, and it is wrought with tension. Loved every minute of it.
It is worth singling out here the director Anish Shaganti, and I apologize if I mangled his name. But he's came to prominence a couple of years ago for Searching, the movie starring John Chu, which was I can't remember the name of the genre, but it's basically like screen dramas. The idea is that it unfolds entirely on screens, be they phone screens, be they laptop screens, Skype conversations, stuff like that. And again, it's a concept that should be incredibly dull and incredibly boring and incredibly just like watching somebody over their shoulder working a laptop. But he managed to wring a surprising amount of dramatic tension there, and it actually. I think Searching has a lot in common with Run in that when I was watching it, my gut feeling was this would be the perfect kind of like midnight kind of movie on an Irish television channel in the mid-90s. In that like the plot is absolutely bananas, but there's you never get a sense that anybody writing the script asked the question, is this plausible? Instead, they asked, "Is this exciting?" And that was that was the deciding factor in terms of like whether an idea gets into this script. It's like, is it believable? Does it make sense? Is it possible for this world that we created to exist for more than 20 minutes outside of the movie we're watching? And it's like, I don't really think so. But it is exciting. It's in the movie. And I adore that aspect of it, because as Jack pointed out, you don't really see those movies anymore, particularly in cinemas. So it's it was great to see it. And again, this is the kind of thing I think Netflix have been trying to do this a great deal with movies like, say, Extraction starring Chris Hemsworth, to kind of fill that gap that exists in terms of like action or thriller movies. But none of them are as good as this at doing that, if that makes sense. In that I feel like a lot of the directors who are very good at doing that sort of schlocky stuff would much rather do films that are going to be released in cinemas, and that means doing stuff that's based around intellectual properties and kind of scaling up very, very quickly, as opposed to taking $50 million to make a movie that will appear on a streaming service and perhaps be less prestigious. So I think that, yeah, I'm really, really happy that Run exists and it got this release, and it is a delight in those terms.
Yeah, I mean, I know you use the term Hitchcockian to describe it. I always think of, like, one of Hitchcock's kind of proteges, Brian De Palma, when I see a movie like this, where it's just, as you say, almost completely implausible that this could happen in reality. But is it fun to watch? Absolutely.
Right.
Like, can you maybe sort of see the twists coming if they're there? Yes. But are they going to be well executed? Are you going to be tense and on the edge of your seat for every minute until we get the full reveal? Yeah. And a lot of it is down to the performances as well, as we've said.
We single out Paulson. We should also single out Kira Allen, actually, as well, because I think this is the first, or at least the first major action thriller movie since I think The Sign of the Ram in 1947 or 1948 to actually feature a wheelchair using performer at its core. And she's absolutely incredible in it, and the movie is built remarkably well around that. It's kind of, again, it never feels, and again, it's one of those things that's very, you imagine it's very difficult to do because, as we've described it, it is incredibly schlocky. It would be there's no moment of hesitation. This goes straight to 11. And to do that, but to do it in a way that never feels particularly exploitative or particularly like it's taking advantage or particularly like it's cynical. Given that subject matter, it's quite remarkable. I think that's something that it bears crediting the movie with, to be fair.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And if I can chime in, so my sister is a wheelchair user. So I'm very familiar with looking at the way that someone in a wheelchair moves. And it's something I even noticed watching Run was, like her movements while she's in the wheelchair, and there is a later moment where she gets out of the chair and she's using a cane to walk. I was like, gosh, she's very good. She's really nailed the movements. And it was only afterwards I kind of Googled it and realized that Kira Allen herself is a wheelchair user. And Chagarty and the producer, whose name is Seva Hanian, had specifically put out the casting call saying, we do need greater representation for wheelchair users, for people with a disability, particularly in a movie like this, which is kind of centered around the fact that she has this disability. She is in the care of her mother almost constantly, and I think that's a really wonderful thing to see on screen, and I'm very excited for my sister to watch it, not just for representation reasons, but because she loves Sarah Paulson. Like, I cannot imagine a movie that could be more tailor-made to her interests than a really schlocky drama with Sarah Paulson and an actual wheelchair user playing a wheelchair user. So and she's a good actress. She's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. She's fantastic in it, and it's just, like, not only her, but like, and this is, once we get into spoilers, we can talk a little bit more about this, but like, just the way they are able to draw out these tense moments, these suspenseful sequences, which like are tiny little moments that they do a fantastic job of stretching out right to their breaking point. And yes, a lot of them are not plausible in a real world, but literally none of that matters because it's so good.
And what I will say, actually, almost the inverse of that is also worth recognizing, which is that they stretch out these brilliantly implausible moments and generate suspense and wring suspense from it. But there is no fat on this. The movie gets going pretty quickly. Like, as I remember watching it, and it's like, whoa, okay, this is what we're doing. We're doing this. That's it. We're not like there. And again, this isn't a spoiler because this is like the opening 4 minutes. The opening 4 minutes are literally just the movie establishing the characters and their routine, and then going, and here we go. We're off to the races. There's no fat on there. There's no sense of kind of like, well, we should take a moment, pause, kind of let people catch their breath, maybe add some like character development that isn't suggested through action, although a lot of it is, which is quite impressive as well. But there's no sense of, well, okay, now we're going to give them a moment where the characters talk slowly to one another, or we cut away to something else because this needs to be 2 hours long because it's on a streaming service. Like, nope, we go straight from one improbable and tense in the situation to the next. I really genuinely love that.
90. A tight 90. And I suppose, well, you know what? Just on that jump off point, let's get into spoilers. So heads up for Run. We are about to talk spoilers. You can go to time code 52 minutes, 7 seconds to skip all the spoilers and probably get us into Hillbilly Elegy. That's hopefully an easy way I can insert the spoiler time in there. Okay,
podcast
so
magic.
Editing. something that's a little disappointing to me, as soon as last night we for Thanksgiving, we're recording this the day after Thanksgiving here in America. Usually a family tradition for us is to have a movie marathon all day with the kids, eat fast food, and it's the most fantastic time. And so I said, after we got done with the movie marathon, I knew I needed to watch Run. I'm trying to convince my wife to watch it with me. I watched the trailer, and as soon as you watch the trailer, you will know exactly all the things that will happen in this movie. As soon as you watch the movie, you can tell exactly all the things that will happen in this movie, beat for beat. So on that side of things, you know this movie before you watch it. It is a template of a suspense thriller movie. That being said, it's done very well, but it was a little disappointing where there were no real subversions. If I can start a negative.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I think, trailers tend to give a lot away anyway, the way that they're cut these days. Like, very often watching a trailer is like watching a 2.5-minute version of the movie. But yeah, even just by virtue of the kind of movie this is, and trying to get people to watch it on Hulu, I guess. They're like, well, we better give you as much information as much information as you'll get from watching the whole movie in 2.5 minutes, which then, why would you watch it? Why would you watch the full thing? But yeah, it is very generic in that way. And I would say, as we have already, that the performances are really what carry it rather than any generic novelty. I don't know if you guys would add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd agree with that. And I think, I don't think it's necessarily a huge problem because the whole point is execution. It's executed very, very, very well. But I do think that, and again, this is one of those situations where I have a buddy with whom I watch lots of movies, and he watches less movies than I do, and we will occasionally have discussion. I'll be like, this was incredibly predictable. It was, from the moment the movie started, I knew it was going to do X, Y, and Z. His response is always, Darren, you watch too many movies. Not everybody has watched as many movies as you do. Not everything is as fundamentally obvious. And I think there was a point when we were going, I remember talking with another film critic friend about like Blade Runner 2049. And I was like, oh yeah, but I guess that they were setting up the idea of the chosen one. And my friend's like, oh yeah, but I guess that they were setting it up in order to subvert it and reverse it. And my buddy who I watch movies with, I just watched a movie. I just enjoyed it. What are you guys talking about? So I mean, there is a tendency perhaps to overstate the extent to which it being a genre exercise is a problem. That said, I did see pretty much all of the major plot developments coming, and I mean not even just like the kind of beat for beat plot stuff where it's very obvious that this is that she's being kept by her mother in this situation, so her mother has Munchausen by proxy. But it's also even things like telling that the baby, and again we're in spoiler territory, right?
Yeah, we're in spoiler territory.
So telling that the baby that you saw at the start is not the child that you see through the film, for example. That's fairly obvious early on. And even the big, like the big, and again it's a moment that's sold by kind of Kira Allen and it's sold by Sarah Paulson, so I'm hesitant to complain about it too much. But the closing scene of the movie, where you get that inevitable dramatic reversal between the two, where the power dynamic is literally reversed, it's the most obvious way that you could have ended a movie like this, and you see it coming 1,000 miles out. Even before things have escalated dramatically, you're like, well, I bet the really ironic way to end this movie would be for the two of them to swap places somehow. And like by the time that Sarah Paulson's character had drawn a gun and was standing on top of a giant pile of stairs, I was like, I see where this is going. I see very specifically how they've set up this Rube Goldberg machine to pay itself off. So, I mean, I do think that's a problem. I do think, like, again, this is a situation that we talked about where it's like, it's never, is this plausible? It's always, is this exciting? But it never feels like, they went for a second idea, or they went for an idea that wasn't the most immediately gripping and visceral thing. It was like, first impulse, best impulse. That was the kind of attitude that they seemed to have making Run. And I think the filmmaking is good enough that it's not a major problem, but I do think it holds it back from being like a better film, for being a film that would be in, say, my top 20 or top 30 of the year, as opposed to just a film that I really enjoyed and I'm really, really glad that I watched.
Yeah, no, and it's like, so now that we're in full spoiler territory, the concept of someone purposefully making you sick as part of some sick codependent violent behavior is a very personal, very unwarranted, but very personal, real fear of mine. Like, there's nothing in my tragic backstory that has to do with that, but like that kind of creepy, someone's making you sick on purpose. I know, like, the Sixth Sense had that little sequence that was
Misha
dealing
Barton,
with
wasn't
that.
it? Is that Misha Barton? Do I remember correctly? Was that Misha Barton?
It is
in that
Misha
role?
Barton.
Yeah.
Oh, I did.
Nostalgia.
Oh, okay. And so, like, it's very creepy. It's very visceral. The twists that, she wasn't really her real daughter. She's been poisoning her this whole time. Yes, it's all so predictable. And some of and of course this comes from my personal experiences of being a parent and removing a child from the hospital. There's no way you can do that. They have so many safeguards for babies in hospitals. It just doesn't happen anymore.
Also, the really quiet area of the hospital that she tries to leave through as well, which I find absolutely fascinating, where it looks like nobody's bothered to turn on any lights, but they've just left it unlocked, which seems like a big health and safety no-no to me. My own personal favorite incongruous detail was and again, it works really well because it's doing what it's supposed to do, which is to generate suspense and get you on the edge of your seat. But the moment where she's in the basement going through the family photos and she picks up the picture of herself as a baby, and like written on it there's the post-it, and the post-it is over the second half of her body, and it's like, why would anybody put a post-it there on the picture unless they were setting up the reveal where a person would later peel off the post-it and reveal that the person had the use of their legs as a child? Like, there are elements like that.
Why would anyone who kidnapped a child keep the clipping of their real parents?
I love the idea that, well, maybe at one stage she is going to let her go off to college, and then she'll just get this stuff framed as a nice memory, kind of like down in my basement in my little study room. It's like, well, she's gone off to college, she's flown the nest. Let's remember all the good times that we had together.
Oh, remember when I kidnapped her and these are the names and pictures of her real parents that I keep in this box with her name on it? Yeah.
And the death certificate of the child that I applied her name to. And the photos where I put post-its over anything that, if she's looking through it later, might provide a surprise to her.
Yeah. And this is a room that isn't even presented as like, because she doesn't have the use for legs, she can't get in there. It's like, she could get in there at any time. It's really bizarre that they're like, it took her 18 years to find this box of secrets. Yeah.
There's a safe room in the basement that is lockable, but all the implicating evidence is outside the safe room.
Of it, yeah.
And of course that overlooks the giant chemical calculations for exactly how much poison you can give to a girl to keep her crippled but not kill her. Like, Sarah Paulson has literally done the poison math. And they show it on a big blackboard. My
favorite bit is when they show her Googling as well, like, because she's putting the work in. She's really putting the work in here. And but again, it is improbable and it is silly, but I like that the movie owns that silliness. Like, I feel like if you were to like justify this, or to spend time explaining how improbable this is, or to like create a sequence where she has to, I don't know, break a lock to get into a filing cabinet to find that information, that would probably slow down the momentum of the rest of the movie around it.
Slow it down too much, yeah.
Yeah. It's like, we ain't got time for a filing cabinet.
It's called Run, not linger over details.
Yeah.
Well, no, and like, we can all laugh at these very schlocky moments, and it's a very schlocky movie, but it's so well made that, like,
it's very enjoyable.
Yeah. It just none of that matters. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I do wish we had started to see that switch between the balance of power between the two of them happen a little earlier on. Like, there is an extended period at the end of the movie where Chloe is doing very little to actually get out her mother as this dominant, controlling figure. And even that climax above the stairs, I was expecting something to happen, like she suddenly use her legs again and she kicks her down the stairs, or she has a cane or something she can use to herself, cause her mother's downfall, like her literal downfall, these stairs. But, she scrawls mom on the piece of paper, but then she gets immediately, carted out in the wheelchair by her mother. And the scene, the very like last scene in the prison where the reveal is that she's sort of slipping her pills and she is now making her mother sick. It's very silly, it's very obvious, but I think it is necessary just to establish, look, she does now have that balance of power.
Yes. No, absolutely.
Which she doesn't in the climax of in the very, the point of where she should be the one taking control. She doesn't.
Well, and for me, like, Chloe's entire arc is about these very small moments. Like, so like her victory at the end is literally the ability to take her foot off of her wheelchair and put it on the ground. That's her big hero moment at the end, right? Which is a very small moment. But that's actually a part of the movie that I really liked, was all of these incredibly tiny character moments that were stretched out. Like I mentioned before, alluding to, like, her ability to press the help button was incredibly stressful. Her ability to call someone on the phone so they could Google something, like that sequence. How long did that scene last? Like 8 minutes? It was gorgeous.
Yeah. And like so nominally kind of normal in those stakes. Sarah Paulson's sitting outside, and again, I love the shots of Sarah Paulson with the wine glass. It's a very 2020 mood. They're sitting down watching the videos, watering the plants outside, the tomatoes, kind of just smoking. So yeah, kind of just sort of like drinking away in the morning, afternoon drinking. Like, it's a luxury of like Munchausen by proxy people everywhere apparently. But yeah, like, and the fact that all that scene involves is a character crossing the room, crossing back, checking the phone, and trying to find a way to get the information without her mother realizing that she will have accessed it. Which, by the way, is hilarious in hindsight. I love the idea that at one point she's terrified her mother will see a 99-cent call charge on the bill, given how quickly the movie escalates well past that point. Yeah. But again, like, the fact that you can wring tension from those small details is phenomenal.
No, absolutely. It's just incredibly well made. Predictable. Sure, but super well made, and if you already have a Hulu subscription, like so many people do, is so worth a movie night.
Yeah.
Run. Great. So now that we have talked about a nice, tight, short, well-made movie, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Hillbilly Elegy, directed by Ron Howard, based off of the, I think, best-selling memoir of our main character, J.D. Vance. Correct.
Venture capitalist, lawyer, hillbilly survivor, J.D. Vance. That's by his account, to be clear. That's not a judgment that I'm making. That's just me interpreting the movie that I've just watched.
Well, holy moly. Yes. I guess I'll start here as the only American here, and as possibly the only hillbilly here, due to my particular family circumstances, which I won't get into. I have had the pleasure of growing up both as a hillbilly and in quasi high society, and I can actually tell you two things that are very important and very misleading about this movie. One, we call ourselves rednecks all the time.
Okay.
Like, that is a word of pride amongst rednecks. They call each other rednecks all the time. I don't know where he got that. Two, those fancy forks, like that sequence that happens in these movies where people worry about the fancy forks. No one cares. Literally, no one cares. If you're at a fancy club, no one will call you out on it. Because no one cares. We just eat the food.
Also, the basic concept of manners is that you can't call someone out if they make an error like that. Like, the whole point is that the system in which you find yourself awkwardly positioned is designed so that if you have the balls to just pick up a fork and use it, nobody is going to call you out on it.
No one's going to
but yeah.
Nobody does.
But yeah, and again, like you mentioned, that is the problem with Hillbilly Elegy in a nutshell. Is the fact that absolutely everything in this movie, like, despite the fact it's based on Vance's own childhood experiences, and again, there's been a lot written about that. There's a lot written about how much he understands or doesn't understand about the culture, and that's written by people who are far better positioned than I am to judge that and to make that judgment. Well worth seeking those people out and reading their commentary and their reviews. What I would say is that, like, from an outsider perspective, from somebody who has seen a lot of these type of movies before, like, we just talked about Run, and what we said about Run was Run never picked a second idea. Run was always like, first idea, best idea, and makes that work. The problem with Hillbilly Elegy is that it picks first idea and that's it. It doesn't like try to make it work. It doesn't make it work any better. It just goes, well, how do we show or communicate this thing? And the answer is always like every other movie about poverty has shown this thing. So like that sequence that Jack mentions where a character is confronted with a place setting with, 3 forks and 4 knives or whatever, and has to figure out which one to use to eat. And the answer is always you start from the outside and work your way in. That sort of thing is I know that you start from the outside and work your way in, not because I go to fancy dinners, but because I've watched lots of movies where people have gone to fancy dinners and been confused by the fact the place settings are laid out. But I mean, like, and similar thing happens later on. There's a sequence where he's driving back home because, and again, this is just the premise of the movie. This isn't really a spoiler. He's driving back home because of a family emergency. And it's okay because he has a job interview the following morning. Again, the path of least possible resistance. What is the easiest way to communicate the stakes in this movie that you're watching? Oh, well, he has to choose between his 2 lives because he's got to go home to be with his family, but he also has a job interview and he has to choose between the 2 and make a decision that will shape his future. But there's a sequence when he does that, when he goes to a petrol station or a gas station and he pays with his credit card, and the credit card is declined. And again, this is shorthand for, well, this is a poor person, because he doesn't know how much money is in his account, and he has to be told how much money isn't in his account, so that he will know that he's poor, and everybody else will know that he's poor. And, like, even, and again, it's a scene that you've seen in so many movies, but even as somebody who, in my past, has literally had to penny pinch and calculate how much I can eat in a given day to get to the end of the month and my next payday. Anybody who's been in that situation knows that you always know exactly how much you have, and you are very rarely put in a situation where you put in a card and it's declined because you know it's going to be declined. So instead of doing that, you're like, no, don't add extras to my Subway, or no, I don't want, I don't want the drink that comes with the thing that I'm buying, even if it only costs 50 cents more. I want the roll. That's what I want. And like when you're getting petrol, and I think that Aja Romana at Vox made this point as well, when you're getting petrol, you know exactly how much you can afford to pay, and you watch the ticking of that little register cent by cent by cent, because you know exactly what it's worth.
No. It should be noted, by the way, 3 scenes earlier, we see our main character at his, very, at his low status job at his high status university as a dishwasher. What does he do in that scene? Knowing what we know about his character, that he is not very well off, he does not have a lot of money to spend, he forgets his paycheck. You tell me anyone who is in that situation who would absent-mindedly forget to pick up their paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's such a surface level look at that world. And like I said, I have been able to kind of, not most of my life, but part of my life, I have lived in a world very similar to that. We're in Wisconsin, so we're not hill people, like apparently they were, but very similar to that, and very similar to the high status part. And it is all so hollow and quick how they pick these little moments.
Yeah, like it's really not a movie that feels lived in any great sense of the word. There is this sort of opening sequence where he talks about the happiest time of his life was when he spent summers in Kentucky. And we don't really know why that is, other than he's told us. Like, there's a lot of telling without showing us in this movie. And I would say grounding it in those locations is something that it really just does not do. Like, we never go back to Kentucky. The rest of the movie jumps between the present day, where he's trying to get this job. He's in Yale Law School, and he's trying to get an internship for the summer. And then it goes back to the 90s, where he's in Ohio, like different places in Ohio. And there's this suggestion that they move around this area a lot. They don't stay in the same place a lot, but they're in the same general area. But they could be anywhere. Like, this could be happening just down the road for all that it tells us about rural America, or the kind of lifestyle that he is purporting to be trying to get out of.
No, and that opening sequence is so telling of the rest of the movie. I know we talked about this a little bit in The Devil All the Time, which has, even though, and it shares an actress, which is a shame, but has a very similar poverty tourism feel to it. Where like that opening sequence in literally the hills of Kentucky, they exposit this dialogue about like, oh yeah, we grew up running in mud puddles, hard drinking while fixing trucks and fighting. Oh, you gotta fight when the fight is called on you, but we always got our families back. And it's like, what kind of trite
Jack, you're forgetting the best and most important part of this. Like, weird, and again, the weird, like, it's directed so weirdly. It's Ron Howard doing Terrence Malick in the style of the Rousseau brothers, like from Avengers Endgame. It's the most surreally constructed sequence. It's like trying to do this idea of like To the Wonder or kind of like Tree of Life, this idea of kind of like a slice of life or majesty or divine view of the world, except it's literally just, well, we put a camera in some grass at an odd angle, that counts, right? But there's a sequence where like, and again, it's the most revealing sequence in the movie because it's the path of least resistance, which is, what is our establishing moment for JD? What is the moment where the film tells us everything that we need to know about JD as a human being, where he's from, and how he ended up where he was going to be? And the answer is, he helped a turtle. Like, that's it. That's like the movie's core thesis statement on JD Vance from beginning to end is, this is a man who was able to get out of a horrific environment, devastated by poverty, not because of like systemic advantage, not because the people around him really supported him, and we'll come back to that idea in a moment, but because at his core he's just fundamentally better. When the people around him wanted to peel a turtle out of its shell and let it die, JD refused to let them do so, and that is all you need to know about him. That's his defining attribute. You don't need to know anything about like where he's from. As Stacy pointed out, you don't need to know anything about like the place where he lived or grew up or any of the details or surrounding facts around him. All you need to know is that JD is the kind of guy who would help a turtle.
Yeah, it's that kind of like bootstraps bullshitism that is all over this movie. And I don't know much about the author except for like little bits that I've been reading here or there. Apparently, after the book came out, he was most well known just for the news circuit of telling, his own story where he was able to lift himself up by his bootstraps. But even beyond all that, if we ignore all of that, the filmmaking, looking at the pure craft, it is just light and surface level characterization all throughout the film.
It's Hallmark Oscar movie. Like that. It's literally like if you ask like the people who make Hallmark movies to make an Oscar prestige drama, this is what you'd end up with, where you don't end up with characters so much as caricatures, like two-dimensional objects. Like this stars Amy Adams and Glenn Close, two of the greatest, like again, two really fantastic actors, and two actors who have built and cultivated this narrative, and a very fair one, I would argue, of like never having taken home an Oscar despite deserving to have done so. And like there's a real sense watching Hillbilly Elegy that like both of them are going for it, and like there's no and again it's very similar to what you see happen with say DiCaprio, when DiCaprio wanted that Oscar so bad, and The Revenant was like the most acting. It was DiCaprio like, I am going to eat raw bison liver, I will kill myself if you do not give me that Oscar that I deserve, I'm holding my own life to ransom. And it almost feels like watching Hillbilly Elegy, like there's a real sense of Amy Adams going, give me the Oscar or I will keep doing this. I will make more movies like this. I will keep performing in the way that I am here, so cravenly, so crassly, with no nuance, no depth, no sophistication. I'm like watching it, and it's again, it's remarkable for a movie that is so dull and so boring and so lifeless. But like you watch it and you get a sense of Amy Adams is acting as if every moment she's in the film could be that 2-minute Oscar clip that they play when it's like, and now Best Actress nominee Amy Adams. I think there's a moment where she yells about a dog, and it's like, the dog is never mentioned again. The dog never really comes back. The dog's not like a setup or payoff. The dog's not even a particularly complex metaphor for anything that she's dealing with. But it's just like, this dog! And it's like, okay, Amy, we get that you're excited about the dog. Maybe take it down a bit so that when you go up, we know that you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think like part of that is a problem with the thing they were attempting, which was to show the, you know, very possible bipolar nature of Amy Adams, the mother character, of kind of the duality of JD's life, is, you know, having these happy moments, having these intense moments, having these sad moments. They want to get all of this information across, but instead of letting like a scene happen naturally that runs that gamut, or let each individual moment land, have us feel that, cut to a different moment later, land and have us feel that, they almost like rubber stamp the moments in every single scene. Oh, I'm so happy we got a new dog. I've always wanted a puppy. My mom is now super angry at this puppy for doing something a normal puppy would do. Now they're fighting. Everything is horrible. Now I feel sad. In the same 3-minute span, rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp,
and over again, and over again, and over again.
Yeah, and the structure of the movie does nothing to kind of balance out that repetition, or that sense that maybe, you know, it's too difficult, that these people will never change, that the mother is stuck in this pattern of bad behavior. It just makes it feel endless in terms of the very indiscriminate way that it cuts back and forth between the past and the present of the action. Like, it was very unclear to me whether there was any kind of thematic connection between scenes. It was just like, this thing happened in 2006, and now this thing is happening in 1996, and now we'll go back to 1996 for something completely unrelated to the previous two scenes, except that approximately the same people are there. Like, the structure is so incomprehensible in terms of the movie having any kind of arc. Like, if you were to separate out the kind of past and present narratives, maybe you would get the kind of Yale summer internship, some sort of arc there. Yeah. But it's really hard to see how it has any bearing on, like, how his past has any bearing on that, other than it's a kind of annoying interruption that's getting in the way of his dreams.
Yeah. Like,
you know?
What this reminded me of, and again, my grandmother was a fantastic woman, but a woman of her time. But my grandmother, at certain points, we would talk about concepts like going to therapy, and like the idea of taking care of your mental health. And my grandmother's idea of what therapy was is very similar to what Hillbilly Elegy presents, which is, you are just going to talk for 2 hours about every terrible single thing that I did to you, so you can feel good about, like, yourself in it. And obviously that's not what therapy actually is. But like, watching Hillbilly Elegy, I feel like that's what Hillbilly Elegy kind of feels like catharsis is like. It's just like, remind yourself over and over again that you cannot rely on your mother, that she failed you, even though she may have had good intent, even though it may not have been her fault. You need to continually internalize to yourself how bad she was. And how you do that is by hitting the same points over and over and over again.
Oh, I'm absolutely convinced the reason he wrote this memoir was to justify to his friends why he decided to abandon his mother. It's like, no, we get it. Like, we've all been there. You don't need to write a book about it. It's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm a good person. I saved a turtle once. Please remember this for the rest of the story that I tell you.
Well, I mean, like, it's so, like, again, not to get too way down in the politics of it or anything like that, but the like, the core thesis of the movie, and it's weird because it's a feel-good movie. It's designed to, like, you can tell that it's designed so that people watch, and again, it's not arguably aimed at our demographic, it's arguably aimed at kind of older people who want to feel good about having, like, sampled the rich stew of American cultural experience, but not in a way that makes them uncomfortable, like, say, I don't know, Winter's Bone, or, like, Little Woods, or, like, I don't know, Mickey and the Bear, or Nomadland, nothing like that, nothing that challenges them. This is like the Forrest Gump style approach. This is very similar to Forrest Gump, or dare I say, Green Book. It's like, well, here's a situation that's terrible, but it has a happy ending. So you can feel comfortable that you've confronted something terrible and feel good coming out the other end. What more could you possibly want? But the thing that really kind of gets me about Hillbilly Elegy in that sense is that, like, despite its desire to put a feel-good smile on there, the central thesis of the movie is, yeah, I was entirely right to leave my family behind me and to get the hell out of Dodge as quickly as possible. And I should not feel guilty or terrible or bad about that. And any moment that I might feel bad, that's letting them down. Because, and there's a moment where his sister says, "Don't make us your excuse, JD." And it's like, I feel like when she said that, he was like, I am going to store that. I'm going to put that in my pocket. And whenever anybody says, do you not feel a little bit responsible? Or do you not feel like maybe you could have done more? Do you not feel like maybe you should share the opportunities that you've had? I'm going to say no, because I don't want to make them the excuse for my failings. And it's like, oh, wow. How is this a feel-good story? Like, it's a sociopathic feel-good story.
I do feel like the politics are kind of like sewn in there, especially for, you know, at least here in America, the conservative side of America loves to preach to the choir that is like, oh, the steel mill working, you know, people of the land, the middle class, the poorer class. Oh, that's our conservative base. And they also, not coincidentally, rail against the college elite. People who go to the fancy college. And so this almost feels
who have like 3 forks more than they need, Jack.
First of all,
one more white wine than they need.
forks.
Yeah, one more white wine than they need.
Oh, why give me wine options? Where's the beer? You know what I'm saying? But so like this also just feels like a giant excuse for him to say, no, I went to a fancy college, but I'm not one of those college elites, right? Like, so he could get his, you know, job on Fox News or whatever it is he does now.
Like, there are 2 key elements there that kind of like get me. The first one is, it implies that his mother got hooked on opioids because she's hooked to heroin. She gradually, like, over the course of the movie, like, and again, it's in the opening few minutes, she overdoses. But she's addicted to opioids. And two things that really jumped out at me in terms of this being a feel-good story. The first of which is the sequence in which JD takes her to hospital and the hospital refuses to treat her, and he's initially angry about that. And then the nurse is like, oh, but she doesn't have health insurance. And JD turns to his mother and says, you let your health insurance lapse? This is your fault, just so we're clear. You failed in your personal responsibility. And
How American. How American is that?
The second thing that really kind of galls me in that is that, like, the movie's structured so that, like, you're designed to think that you're told repeatedly that Bev was very similar to JD. She was smart. She was the valedictorian in her high school. She was going to go places. And over the course of the movie, you get a couple of suggestions subtly in the background why she didn't. It suggested that she was hooked on prescription painkillers when she worked in a hospital. But it's never explicitly stated. It's never at any point explained this is why she's where she is now, because a doctor prescribed her this because of a wider systemic issue, because then you'd have to deal with the systemic problem. And the second thing that happens, it's suggested that, you know, maybe the women in these situations don't have the same options that men do because they get pregnant and there's not always the options of family planning available, and so they have to, or are, you know, expected to settle down, and therefore they don't have the freedom that many of the men do to do the stuff that JD wants to do. But that is never never properly, like, stated or grounded in the film. The thing that really I'm sorry I'm so angry about this. The thing that really galls me about this is the moment where the movie tries to say, well, look, JD and Bev aren't so different. JD's just a better person. Is the moment where it parallels Bev's addiction to opioid painkillers, opium, right, which is the most addictive of the majorly freely available drugs, to JD's brief experimentation with marijuana. And he gets scared straight, and he quits, and he goes to college, and he becomes a venture capitalist. And it's very much, and again, this is a movie set in the 90s, it's very much like a Just Say No movie, where it's like, look, if JD could quit hash, which isn't, you know, the least addictive of the majorly accessible drugs, then surely Bev could, like, if she wanted to, clean up her act and get off, like, heroin? And it's like, no, you don't get to parallel those two things. You don't get to say that you are fundamentally stronger or better than your mother because you didn't get addicted to drugs when you tried marijuana and she took heroin. No, sorry.
Well, no, it's everything, like those examples you just said, everything about this movie is incredibly glossed over. Like, they delve a little bit into, you know, child abuse or fighting at home. Or Amy Adams, as a child, her mother, Glenn Close, lights her father on fire at one point, literally lights him on fire because of how terrible their relationship is. And then Glenn Close says, yep, some people are bad, some people are good. You're a good one.
Terminators.
That's right.
And just to take that up as well, like a big issue I had with many of the problems that characters face in this movie, with many of the conflicts that we see arise, is that they are not specifically rural American problems. It's like, yes, these problems exist in working class or rural communities, but by focusing so much on how many of these problems did arise in Ohio, domestic abuse, substance abuse, petty vandalism as a teenager, as we see JD kind of falling into, it almost feels like it's ghettoizing Ohio at the expense of like presenting where he ends up as this Yale Law School grad as, a place where these problems don't exist, where there is no substance abuse or domestic violence. And
exactly. It's
ghettoizes
fetishizing.
the problem. Yes.
Yeah.
By saying, look,
absolutely.
he's escaped all of this. Like, literally he's no longer physically in this place and these problems don't exist. Like, there's a moment in the film where he has to tell his girlfriend that his mother has overdosed on heroin, and his reaction to telling her is like, surely you've never heard, like, you don't know anything about what a heroin overdose could mean. It's like, as if heroin does not exist in a kind of urban sphere, which is his reaction to it is so bizarre to me. He's like, do you even know what this means? She overdosed on heroin. Like, you have no idea what that could be like. It's just because.
No. And she accepts that to be true. Like, wow, I had no idea. Wow.
Yeah. It's a very strange way of presenting it. It's like these problems as being so specific to this community and to this class, when really they're not. Yeah. And I find that just very troubling. Like, very reductive,
Absolutely.
very glossed over, and very just simplifying the issues that the film presents by saying that they are limited to this community.
And I would actually recommend Sarah Jones at Vulture did a really good article basically looking at kind of the question of who this is for and what it's supposed to represent. And the stuff that Stacey said is very much part of it. And when Stacey was talking there, I was thinking of, and again, this is very indicative of the kind of movie this is and who this movie is for, thinking a lot of Green Book. And the thing about Green Book is Green Book has the exact same ending as Hillbilly Elegy. If anybody here hasn't seen Green Book, apologies, I'm going to spoil it for you, but don't worry, you're not missing much. But there's a moment where, like, they've been traveling through the South and they've been experiencing racism in the 1960s, and it's horrific and it's brutal and it's humiliating and it's embarrassing. And then at the end they drive home for Christmas, and basically, they're driving so long through the night, and all of a sudden police sirens, flashlights come up behind them, and they pull into the side of the road, and it's tense because you've seen what happens to a black man when he's stopped by police in the 1960s America. And then the cop gets out, he walks over, and he's like, so you got a flat tire, would you like me to fix that? And then you see a sign saying, like, welcome to Illinois. So it's like, hey, we're in the North now. These problems don't exist. Racism does not exist anymore. We've managed to leave the realm in which we've contained the problem of racism, and by crossing the Mason-Dixon line, everything's grand now. It's all perfect. We all worked it out. Thank goodness we solved racism. And there's a real element of that to Hillbilly Elegy because, like the problems, as Stacey pointed out, like drug addiction is a massive problem no matter where you are. Opioid addiction is a massive problem no matter where you are. Domestic violence is a massive problem no matter where you are. But here you get this sense, and again, as somebody who isn't American but watches and consumes a lot of American pop culture, this sense of othering that you have of rural Americans, where it's like they're a different class. They're a different, again, it's very similar to what you see with race. Like we joked about Predator 2 earlier on, but it's that sort of thing where it's like, this is somewhere over there populated by people who are fundamentally different from us, and therefore they have problems, but we don't. So all we can do is just look on and be like shocked and horrified at all the problems that they have that we don't have, and like extend our sympathies and hopes and prayers for them.
Well, and I think it goes even more insidious than that. Like, because obviously there's a lot of glossing over. There's a lot of there's a lot of like washing over actual real problems that happen world over, not just America, not just poor counties, sorry. But the more insidious nature is like specifically saying JD is a good person. You're the good Terminator.
He's a good one.
Amy Adams, bad Terminator. And so like, you're doing good because you choose to be good. And it's like, that ain't how that works. You know, we talked earlier about the sequences in which money was involved, because there is an idea that poor people are only poor because they are bad with money and therefore choose to be poor. And so like, to me, it sows these insidious ideas where this is a movie literally made for your conservative grandpa who will watch it and go, yes, everything I thought was right. It's insulting. It's slightly insulting to me.
But
this movie.
it's even worse than that, because it's like designed so your conservative grandpa will like wash his hands and go, yeah, but I feel sorry for them, and isn't that enough? They have like my empathy and compassion, and I understand now. I understand their pain because I've seen it, and I know that if there were just more good ones of them, they'd succeed. And it's terrible that there aren't more good ones. Like, why can't there be more J.D. Vances?
Right? Ugh.
I will say, actually, one of the things I found interesting is, like, there's a moment towards the end. I'm sorry, we have actually just talked about this with spoilers, apologies. But there's a moment at the end where, like...
I don't care.
Okay. There's a moment where the end where his girlfriend, Usha, like, runs out, like, where he's, like, driving all night, and it's like, I'm not going to get home to the interview, I'm not going to get to the interview, I'm going to lose the job, and that means I'm going to lose my placement, that means I'm going to lose my chance to go to college. And he rings his girlfriend, Usha, and he's like, could you do me a huge favor? Could you run across town and tell them I'm going to be late for the interview? And implicitly, this is what gets him the job. This is what, like, she runs over, she explains, oh, I'm sorry, my boyfriend had a personal crisis, he will be there, but he will be late, and implicitly he gets the job afterwards, so you can assume that they bought it. Like, that sequence should be saying nobody gets there on their own. The core thesis statement of that moment should be, well, it's very lucky that JD had the support structure that he had that allowed him to do these things. And instead,
which would theme well with the rest of the movie, where he didn't necessarily have that support structure. Yes, yeah.
But instead, like, that's the last appearance of Usha. She doesn't appear again. She walks out the door and she's gone. And it's just, it's infuriating. And again, like, it even happens with Momo, where, like, throughout the movie, it looks like it's going to tell you that maybe Momo is going to, like, lift him up. Momo is the reason why, because she devotes herself to him and to teaching him. But then the movie kind of doubles down on the, well, you're all in alone, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Because at one point she says, well, don't worry, you'll always have me. And in literally the next scene, he comes home and finds her face down, collapsed on the floor, as if to say, no, JD, you can't trust anybody but yourself. It's all up to you.
Yeah, no, and it should be pointed out, you didn't give the punchline to that setup, which is, you know, like, he should count on other people to help him, because having a support structure is incredibly important for anyone's success. As it turns out, he wasn't late. He was playing a trick on her. He made it all by himself on time. Don't worry, he did it.
Yeah.
Ugh. Ugh.
Yeah.
It's that very classic kind of American dream narrative of, like, individual accomplishment as opposed to having support from other structures. And if you can make it on your own, that's heroic. And if you can't make it on your own, that's because you're a bad Terminator. You know?
What is a neutral Terminator? Can I ask what a neutral Terminator is? Like, that's my big question.
That's right.
That's my one, like, let's ignore the fact that, like, Momo, despite having watched Terminator 2 100 times, doesn't understand Terminator 2.
Doesn't understand the movie.
What is a neutral Terminator?
Because, by the way, in Terminator 2, no neutral Terminator exists.
Yeah. And
she specifically says there's bad Terminators, there's good Terminators, and there's neutral Terminators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that really condescending thing. It's very much, again, for your older relatives, because it's meant to be this big inspiring moment, like the the classic, well, you've got two wolves fighting inside yourself, and which one wins? The one that you feed. Or the life is like a box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. The whole point is to, like, present the movie's core moral thesis in a way that is folksy and welcoming and, like, not pretentious, like those college elites that Jack mentioned. So it talks about something that ordinary Americans can understand, ordinary audiences, and presumably, like, rednecks or hillbillies or kind of, like, people in these communities can understand, to talk to them on their level in a way that is incredibly condescending, really, really condescending, but also fundamentally misunderstands what it's being condescending about. It's dazzling. Like, the Terminator metaphor is like, it's so terrible. It's almost impossible to articulate how awful the everybody is a Terminator. You just have to decide which one you are, ignoring the fact that the Terminators are programmed, ignoring the fact that the Terminators are entirely dependent on the support structure around them, ignoring the fact that, like, Skynet, like, to be clear, Skynet is legitimate. Like, Terminator 2 is about literally dismantling systemic problems, in that it is about dismantling a literal system that is a problem, Skynet. And somehow,
like it.
Hillbilly Elegy manages to turn that round into a story of, like, individualist daring do. As if, like, you never watch the end of Terminator 2 where the Terminator sacrifices himself so that John Connor doesn't have to be an exceptional human being anymore. Like, the whole point of Terminator 2 is that, like, the Terminator says, no, John, you don't need to lead a rebellion. You don't need to be a great man. You can just be a child. You can have a good life. You can live with your mother and be with her and, like, have that good life, that family support structure. And, like, you're watching Hillbilly Elegy and you're wondering, what version of Terminator 2 did Mama watch? Where
It's like a version that was edited to be shown during the day. Just over and over again on a cable channel.
Just for red counties. Yeah, I like that.
There's a red state version of Terminator 2.
No, it's, and so, like...
Dear.
Yes, I find this, like, from a pure film, if you are to take all socioeconomic or political messages out of this, from a pure filmmaking standpoint, it is weak as hell. It's very slow. The characters are not characters at all, more caricatures. And the, like Stacy said earlier, the pacing and theme of the movie is incredibly muddled because they spend so much time jumping around. It's a very boring film. That's from a filmmaking standpoint. From a personal standpoint, being someone who has lived some of this life, it is insulting at best. It's amazing. It's amazing how bland and insulting it is. Therefore, I'm sure it will win several awards.
I don't know. It has kind of like 7 nominations, no wins written all over it, which is a problem because, like, it feels like because so many of, like, the big Oscar movies have been pushed back due to the pandemic. A lot of the Oscar bait this year has, like, that 7 nominations, no win kind of feel to it. Like, the Trial of the Chicago 7 has another look of, like, well, everybody in this cast is getting a nomination, but nobody's getting an actual statue kind of quality to it. And, you know, like, watching Hillbilly Elegy, it has that same sort of feel to it, where it's like, I can see Adams getting a nomination, but, like, do we really think that she'll win? Do we really think that she'll pick up that Al Pacino Incentive a Woman Hoo-ah award?
I think Glenn Close will get it. 100%. I will absolutely. Glenn Close, Best Supporting Actress. My money is down right here. The makeup alone. Oh, yeah, playing that caricature. Boom, she's going to get it. Best Adapted Screenplay? Ooh, maybe.
Probably a nomination there. Hopefully not a win. Yeah.
Yeah, but then Green Book.
Yeah, no, we say that we're only 2 years away from it. And they gave it to Parasite last year, so what more could you want? Like, it's like they gave it to a good film. Now you have to, like, balance the books. It's
just like Obama being president. Racism is over now. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ugh. And anything. Hold on, let me just check my notes real quick about Hillbilly Elegy.
I love the idea that, like, Jack sat through Hillbilly Elegy, nothing that he thought is going to be wasted. Like, at least rings up, because, like, the thing is, we mentioned Run is 90 minutes and it just goes. This is 150. This is 115 minutes and somehow feels longer. And I think a large part of that is down to what Stacey mentioned, the repetition. It just does the same stuff over and over. And you're like, I get it. I understand what you're like. Whatever I feel about what you're saying, you've communicated to me. Like, I understand. I get it. I'm not following. I don't need you to do it like a dozen more times for me to follow along with what you're saying. I understand the point you're making, and the movie's like, I don't think you do. I think we could do this a couple more times.
Let's have a couple more scenes of every other person being excessively mean to our main character, and our main character learning the same lesson over and over. This was the Joker of Ron Howard films. Hot take.
Wow. I do feel the need. No, go.
I was just going to say, you know, there's so much repetition in this film, and yet there are these allusions to things that are not touched on at all, like him deciding he wanted to be a lawyer, him getting into college, him getting into law school, him joining the military so he can pay for college. There's so much there that they could have used to structure a better character arc for him and make him a more three-dimensional person. for
glossed
a
over.
book
Yeah.
and a movie that's based on real events and real people, the characterization is non-existent and thin, and there is apparently so much there that they could have put in that just isn't there.
I think like that is an incredibly important statement. This is based off of a true story. These are real people, yet the way they are portrayed in the film, and presumably the book, I have not read the book,
No.
is utterly implausible.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I don't know. I like to think that you yell at Cookie like you're going to win the Best Actor Oscar, Jack. I like to think that when Cookie does something inappropriate, you're like, bad dog, and this is going on my show reel.
There's one scene in particular in which they're driving in a car. I want to say this is right after like the football card shop, and Amy Adams does that same thing she literally does in every scene, where she starts off really loving and then slowly descends into a raving lunatic in literally every scene, in which that right there was the Oscar clip where she steps on the gas and she starts freaking out, and you can see her like turning her acting dial from subtle to Oscar. Ugh.
It's not really a dial, it's more of a switch. It's just...
No, well, see, that's why that scene in particular was the Oscar clip, because you can see it build in her, and so everyone can say, "Oh, look, she's acting now."
Now, you say that, but like it reaches the point at which like you reach Oscar clip, and then it just continues at that level unnecessarily for like 2 minutes. To the point where she terrorizes a woman in her own home. Anyway, and it's like, does this really need to be this long? I get that Amy Adams wants an Oscar. Like that's what the scene's meant to communicate, right?
Yeah, I have to say, like, of the two of the films we've discussed this week, like, if you asked me whether I would enjoy the Amy Adams abusive mother in the Ron Howard Oscar baity Netflix movie, or Sarah Paulson's straight to Hulu, like, De Palma trashy thriller more, I might have had higher hopes for Amy Adams initially, but...
Oh, if this was 5 years ago, everyone goes the Amy. Oh, of course, Ron Howard, Amy Adams, Glenn Close. Oh, that's going to be the clear
wonderful.
best movie, obviously. Yeah. Oh, what is this? A direct-to-video thriller? Ugh, who cares about that?
But you could watch 1.5 runs in the time it would take you to watch Hillbilly Elegy. Or it feels like it anyway.
I'm about to say, it feels like you could watch Run about 5 times and get one Hillbilly Elegy. Yeah, I do feel a need to say something nice about Ron Howard, if only because, like, if I feel like Ron Howard seems like a nice guy, right? He's generally inoffensive and boring, and again, like, I think my abiding
He's a pleasant fellow.
Yeah,
he is a absolute pleasant fellow.
My abiding story, like Ron Howard's story, is that story he tells about when he was doing Happy Days and everybody was out doing drinking and drugs and kind of like partying around and sleeping around, and he was just like, no, I clocked out about 7 o'clock and went home to my wife. We had dinner. I went to bed, got up early, and went to work in the morning, and that's kind of like how I managed to stay on a level head. And it's like, that I like you, Ron. I think that's a nice kind of like Hollywood. More Hollywood stars should be like Ron Howard. But I do feel like, Ron. Oh, God.
But he just, he made a bad movie.
Yes,
it
he did.
happens.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
It happens.
Yeah.
Hillbilly Elegy. We're wrapping that up. I have no more things to say about Hillbilly Elegy because I said it. It's just so boring.
It never ends.
It just
For such a
never
dramatic movie, it's so boring.
It's so boring.
Yeah.
So hopefully you'll just have fun wallowing in how bad it is here in the podcast instead of watching it yourself. Thank you everyone for watching and or listening to this. Once again, I've been Jack Packard.
I'm Darren Mooney.
And I'm Stacy Grouden.
And this has been the Escapist Movie Podcast. Goodbye.